First of all, welcome to Dean, entrepreneur, author, CEO of Scaled Agile Inc., and creator of the SAFE framework. And with that, I'm going to take my beer back.
Thanks. So timing is good for us here because I'm gonna talk about version 4.5, but I do have a request, okay? We're not GA yet, and I had two choices. To trust you folks to say, absorb the information and just hold your peace with Twitter and blogging, etc. for a while, or to talk about 4 and have a fun time and leave and have you guys come back a few weeks later and say, we had missed an opportunity to see the latest stuff. So I trust you guys, okay? So let's just keep this to ourselves for now. And obviously it's not that great a risk because we're very, very close, as you can see, coming soon, very soon. This was not what I wanted to call it. Chief methodologist, it means I have to listen to a lot of people and make hopefully good decisions. Its title before was SAFE for Lean IT, Software and Systems Engineering. And I thought that was a really pithy title because those are the markets we serve. And if you think about the industry, those are kind of the verticals. IT shop has one set of issues, a big kind of cyber physical systems builder has another, and the software enterprises have another. But the problem was, with that title, people felt we may not be able to engage the business. So we even talked to Gartner about it because Gartner is really keen on the lean IT thing. So before we adopted this name, we did a kind of a last minute check and we talked to Gartner as well and we said, here's what we're hearing. If you say lean IT, that's not about the business. And the business owners won't engage. So even though you're very specific, it's not quite the right label. It's not quite broad enough. So we said, look, we're trying to build a lean enterprise. Now between you and me, we're not all things to all people. We're not trying to figure out how to, better organize nonprofits or run marketing departments in accordance with lean and safe. If there's a lot of code in it, like 1 million lines, we're probably good. Outside of that, we're not going there. So we're not creating instances of SAFE or variances for other types of businesses. Others can do that. They're certainly welcome to it. Our job is pretty simple. Are you building a big, hard system? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, we want to help with that, okay? Because that's what we do. I'm an engineer. I'm a systems engineer. I gravitated to software because it was interesting, hard, nobody knew how to program those new mini computers that were out there. So we are SAFE for lean enterprises and coming very, very soon. Now, we rarely, if at all, talk about the business of SAFE for a couple reasons. One of which is we didn't start out to create the business of SAFE. And secondly, we're a B2B business. So our business happens through our partners. So the sponsors, the people that you heard, the Bradtechs of the world, the version ones, those are our partners. And they do the work. They do the tooling to help you and they do the service delivery. But just to make sure that you know you're not alone, we've met some pretty good objectives over the last year. The most interesting one is probably this one. Would you have guessed that over 120,000 people have been trained in SAFE? And who are most of those folks? Think about that for a second. Most of them took leading SAFE. Who's that designed for? Leaders and managers. So if you want to talk about the potential to make an impact, you start there. So I think the thing that we can all be proud of is that I didn't train those people. Right? You folks train those people. People in the room, how many SPCs are here? I bet there's at least a dozen or so. You guys did the training. So together we've worked to conspire to help educate over 60 or 80,000 managers who didn't grow up on a Scrum team, who weren't part of Agile. And that really makes a big impact. And that impact is felt, and I'm here not because of some spectacular marketing department. We actually have one now. I can announce that, okay? But that's not what we started. We started with a website. We started with a freemium product. We started with deep consulting engagements. And the results, frankly, they're not believable. I wouldn't believe them, except if they didn't come from places like Sony PlayStation. No, I just made that up. Is anybody here from Sony? Okay, Sony PlayStation. Good. Published a case study. I had nothing to do with that. Nobody I know directly had anything to do with that. One of our partners had something to do with that, and those are the results we get. Is it easy to get results like that? Can I get the results with, XP or a couple good Scrum loops? No, I can get a ways down the road, but I need more framework to be able to do that. We need the ability to guide teams. We need to have teams on a common mission. We need some sentiments around architecture. We need some architectural constructs that mean that when 7 teams are building a system, that the architecture underlying the system is robust. We need kind of common experiences in UX so that 7 teams don't each do. We want each of the 7 teams to implement their own elements of UX, but we want them to work in accordance with a set of design standards, right? So you have to have some element of governance. Too much, and you're right back to you've constrained everything with pixel perfect designs and too much architecture. Too little, we're sprinting, the teams are sprinting, but the system may not really evolve and support that. So to that end, there's a 4.5, and there'll be a 5.0 and a 6.0. I personally look forward to version 8. That's going to be my favorite. I predict that by 8 we'll have a lot more figured out than we do now. Why is it 4.5? This is a rocket science market question for you.
SPC4s can remain certified.
Yeah, that's one really good reason. That's half the question, but that's a good question. It is one of the reasons. What's the other reason? Market's not ready for a big change yet. Right, we've just kind of got this momentum. 3 kind of changed things because with 3 you could really support large systems. 4 brought us into the large systems building environment and got us into larger enterprises. This is 5 quality with a 4.5 label to keep people comfortable. And by the way, it is, I'll come back to that in a second, it is backwards compatible. So with a few exceptions, mostly labeling exceptions, the things you're used to, features and backlogs, roles, responsibilities are still there. However, 4 major release themes. We define the content that's released in 4 major areas, and I'm going to go through each. The first one is essential, safe, and configurability. This is a place that, we started big and got bigger and had to kind of go back to first principles, and I'll describe the why of that and what it's there, and for those of you who are SPCs, the stuff you have in your toolkit to address that and configurability. The second is I've always been enamored by and frustrated by the whole lean startup movement because it's this big parallel activity. If you go to Lean Startup Conference, there's thousands and thousands of people there, and they talk about hypothesis-driven development and fast feedback. And large enterprises get freaked out a little bit by that. It's like, well, what does that mean? Can't we think like a startup here? Well, you kind of need to, right? So if you're going to innovate, you're going to have to learn from innovators about how to do that. So we've done a fairly comprehensive job of basically integrating that thinking right inside a SAFe. Now, if I want to act like a lean startup, I have to get fast feedback, for sure, right? What's the bullet 3 on the list? How do I get fast feedback? This is a tautology here. What's bullet 3? Continuous delivery. So if I'm going to get fast feedback, I have to be able to deliver a small amount and get the feedback. So these are not separate thoughts just jammed on a slide. They're a continuum that basically says from the time I think of initiative I want to innovate to the time that I'm kind of shutting down that epic or whatever, it's a continuous flow. And the thing that I'm most happy about with SAFe is that we didn't bolt these things on. We rototilled the guts and said, okay, we want to see flow differently. We want to really see things flow from the innovation from the portfolio and through the art, etc. And then lastly, it's not new, but it's really important, is the implementation roadmap. I'll spend just a few minutes on that. Where's my Carl timekeeper? He's over there jamming it. Okay. Let's start in. Talk about essential safe. So you've seen the thread, most of you, right? The guidance article. And the picture, that's the small picture, okay? The dilemma, okay? How do you represent that small picture in the context of full safe? And a separate dilemma was solving 2 additional issues. One, how do you start? So that's a pretty big picture over there, right? Either of those is a pretty big picture. It's pretty intimidating. It's kind of scary. There's a lot of stuff there, and really smart people have looked at that and said, boy, I don't know, I still think we can do all that. Well, I don't want to lose the conversation before we've even talked about the fact that you don't have to do all of that to start. And secondly, and probably even more critically, as we visited companies after, kind of 18 or 24 months of safe implementation, do you think they still have challenges?
Yes.
Absolutely. So we're sorting through these challenges and say, what are the issues? And they're going, well, give you a good example. One organization, come back to Essential Safe here, couldn't see, the velocity just didn't seem right. They seemed organized, they were agile teams, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to focus on this one. And we drilled into that a little bit, and there were teams of developers and teams of testers. Now, that's not funny, but it's not agile, right? It's not the right structure. And secondly, we said some things like, well, that should have been sussed out. You should have figured out that the flow was too slow. We should have seen that during inspect and adapt. When did you do that last time? Well, we've never been able to adopt that ceremony, that event, because you got that innovation time in there, and that looked like dead time to management. And how does each PI go? Everyone has this huge crunch at the end. We're definitely waterfalling the PI. And I said, tell me about the system demo. And they said, well, that's actually really hard for us, so we can't really do that. So not cross-functional agile teams. They're not doing the system demo every 2 weeks, and they're not doing inspect and adapt. How do you think they're going to do? Pretty tough. So when you look at the big picture, you got to synthesize it. So these are the 10. Lean Agile principles, you got to have them. Real Agile teams and trains. Cadence and synchronization, scalable DevOps and CD, we'll talk about that. PI planning is not optional. I had an interesting little debate about, just in this last group, about, gosh, some people think that that's not Agile because of the PI planning event. Well, you got to do PI planning, okay? And the people that are going to do the work plan the work. That's a basic rule. I don't actually care if that's Agile or not, but I would have a hard time arguing that it's not Agile to have our people plan the work. It would seem kind of be the opposite. Okay, so these are the things you got to do. Lots of other stuff you can do, but if you do these well, you'll be fine. And over there, in your toolkits, I'll speak to the SPCs for a second, is a little workshop, and there's an assessment in there. And I gave the assessment at Agile Mile High for about 500 or 600 people a few weeks ago. And in there you go through and say, do you feel any of these pains? All I have to do is identify, do you have a pain in this area, pain in this area? And it breaks into this little histogram of little black boxes of pains. The most frequent report back was, our leaders kind of support it, but they don't really understand it. And we're still being forced to do agile development in basically a waterfall, heavily governed shop. And we need to fix that. So we need them. We need all of these things. So that's probably about enough on Essential Safe. But what if I want to do a little bit more? So it's a starting point, and it's an assessment point. Every art can be measured on these dimensions. So there's an assessment kit built into your toolkit that says let's just have the art assess itself and see how it thinks it's doing in that process. Okay. What about portfolio level? Okay, been restructured and redesigned. You see some different things. This isn't budgets anymore; it's lean budgets. We have to get over the lean agile budgeting paradigm. We have to move forward with our funding models. Talking today on and on again about kind of cost center based and project based funding and allocation. A project, I described it to our stakeholders there, it wasn't their favorite description, is temporary work for temporary people. How do you build a learning organization if everything is temporary work for temporary people? It's portfolio safe. Now, if I select one of these, it should stick, right? So it's persistent. So you select your view and say, this is the configuration that we're going to run with. Remember the value stream level? Wasn't it confusing to describe how you always have a value stream, but sometimes you have a value stream level? Yeah. Confused the hell out of me, and I wrote it. Okay. So that was just a conflation of terms. As we launched the value stream, we came up with this thing. Okay, when we're building really big systems, what happens if it's a really big value stream? And we kind of stayed away from other language that was overloaded, and we call that the value stream level. It's a large solution level. Okay, if you need multiple arts and probably suppliers, you need some different artifacts. You need to clean adware. That's interesting. That's not helpful at all. Where I picked that virus up.
I just lost 4.5.
Yeah. Fortunately, it's not on this machine, so that's yucky. That's why I have a Mac, so I don't have that stuff. So much for that. This is a configuration. It doesn't have a portfolio. That seems kind of weird. How could you operate without a portfolio? Well, lots of people do. In the context of, for example, government and defense contracting in the U.S., budgets, portfolio management is not the concern of the people doing the implementation. They don't want to talk about it. And CapEx and OpEx is not the right story for them because they don't do it that way. And the lean budgeting thing, frankly, that's not your concern. We funded this, $60 million radar program. We need to execute that. And then, of course, to complete that, you need full safe. So you can configure it however you want. And the second piece of that is in order to make that kind of scalability work, we had to turn the tooling palette on its side. And when we did that, that unlocked our mind from saying, okay, the spanning palette used to be between the program and the portfolio. Well, does that mean a team couldn't have a vision of their own solution set? Well, no, it didn't mean that, but people infer so much by looking at the picture. Some people have implemented, I don't advise this, without even clicking, right? We're doing safe, okay, well, but so teams don't have a vision, even the teams that can release independently. Come on, we got to be a little smarter than that. Well, we have to be smarter than that and reflect that. So we turn them all sideways. So consequently, Essential Safe brings these things along, and the others come with the others. And you can kind of mentally drag and drop. Now, nobody's dragging and dropping anything, but at least we're communicating the fact that you can use whatever pieces you need for whatever solution you have. So we have extended configurability in a couple dimensions. One is just the kind of stacking layer of the thing, and secondly is let's make sure that these are things I want to inherit. I want to inherit me some milestones here, or roadmap or vision, system team, and lean UX, which is different, by the way, than UX. The biggest changes now come in the middle. So configurability was a really big deal for us. The bigger Safe got, the more kind of market momentum we have, the more difficult it became for people to look at that and say, oh, that's a one-size-fits-all approach. It was a framework. That's why we picked the word. But people make snap judgments based upon these things, and we needed to kind of eliminate that as a potential source of confusion. We came up with configurability, and that's going to be a really big help. But I think the meat tends to happen through this kind of other area. And there's a story in here, and I'll try to tell that in slides. It's not really been told much, so might be a few rough spots in it. But we've rethought the nature of an epic, and I'll tell you why and why it works this way while you look at that. I met with the CIO of one of the world's largest cable companies just a few weeks back, and he said, I don't really care what framework they use. Do they do agile stuff? I don't really care. He said, as long as I know what I'm going to get, when I'm going to get it, what the requirements are, and what it's going to cost, and what's the return on investment. He says, I'm good with that. I said, well, let's talk about that a little bit. And I said, give me an example of a significant initiative. And he said, well, we're going to work in this area and do this. And I said, well, what's the hypothesis about that? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, what do you think the business benefits will be when you do that? And he said, well, I think it's a lot like this. I think we're going to get this business outcome. And then I ask another question. How much of that system would you have to build to prove the hypothesis? And it's a pretty big deal. It's like, $30, $35 million invest. And they're about to put a wrapper on this thing and send it out for production for this $35 million. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you can prove the hypothesis without building the entire system, right? Well, yeah, I think we could. So what would you do to do that? And he starts thinking differently. He goes, well, in the cable business, so we could take the existing cable boxes and hack like 1,000 of them and put them in one geographic region and test and see if people use that feature. Yes, you could. So do you really want to fund the 35 million or fund the money it would take to get to that point? So that's the notion of the MVP. So every epic now comes along with a hypothesis statement that says, what it's supposed to do, what the outcomes need to be, and by the way, what's the problem with ROI? When do you get the data on the return on investment of that 35 million? Year one? When?
When you spent it.
Well, even then, it's all gone. Have I got my return yet? It's a horrifically trailing economic indicator. So we don't need him. He has to have an outcome hypothesis that says, I think we'll have the ROI like this. But instead, we'd like to be talking about what are the fast feedback measures? How could you do? It's called innovation accounting. What would you measure in the meantime? So now this guy, who's really a old school, tough, hard bark guy, is thinking differently about the problem. So he walks out not thinking about safe and agile's better than waterfall, or he didn't really care. He walks out thinking about, we could approach our investments a little more incrementally. We could get faster feedback down this path. We could potentially be more innovative with the money we have. Now, what does that do to his budgeting, his annual budgeting process? Pulls the rug out from under it. But does he care if he pulls the rug out from under his own budgeting process? No. Does he care if we pull the rug out? Yeah. So hypothesis is a freaking magic word that says you don't really know, do you? And they go, you're right. So now it's not waterfall v agile. This is proving the hypothesis with the least amount of investment, we're driving the right way. And we have this cool little thing, only you could appreciate it for sure, which is that if you start down the MVP path and launch 10 features, and you come back around, there may be some more features, right? What's the probability that the last envisioned feature delivers as much value as the first? Low. There's a diminishing return on features. How do you know when to stop? I'd suggest autopilot, okay? Because we're going to have lots of input to this particular backlog, and we're going to continue that input until WSJF determines not to work on it anymore. So what's the governance model? Stop working on it when the business owners and the key stakeholders, the people that you've decentralized decision making to, decide that there's something better to work on. So I don't need the full success case. I don't need to fund the whole initiative. I don't know. Is it 35 million or 16 million or 21 million? Doesn't really matter. It's going to be the minimum amount that it takes to get the maximum benefit out of that epic. So an epic was never a holistic blob, but it looks like one. Now it doesn't. Now it looks like a hypothesis with an MVP associated with it. And as you move forward in that process, the MVP, let's just say it has 10 features for the sake of argument. Every lean UX person and people that have kind of come up in the same lean startup theme go, well, that's a big feature. What's the minimum amount of that I could do? So this is the second scope cut. Minimum valuable product, minimum marketable feature. And by the way, what do the lean UX people teach us? They teach us what is the outcome hypothesis for that feature? And how are you going to measure that? So lean UX moved from kind of pixel perfect, somewhat centralized UX designs that should theoretically provide a great set of navigation paths to, well, we only really care if they use it and it works. So the lean UX movement has taken on additional responsibility here, and we just harness that for our benefit. So combination of the MVP on top and the minimal marketable feature give us a double cut on that. I'm going to skip that for the moment just due to time. I won't come back to it either. I have a question now for you. So if I wanted to, just for the sake of argument, move from an annual delivery for a big shop like we were at today to delivering every week, okay? That means that I'll move to the right here a little bit. This is my week. I need to deploy 1/50th of what I used to release. Where did I get the 1/50th? Did I have 50 pieces and I only picked one? No. You're forcing thinking through continuous delivery all the way back through the pipeline that says, I need to constantly be defining a 50th of the system. Because if I don't, I can't release it every week. That says, now that's going to drive incrementalism all the way back up the pipe. It says, where's my next 1/50th coming from? And how do I think about that? And that brings us to, the slightly larger picture, which is that DevOps and continuous delivery gives us the capability we need to provide that feedback. So the MVP that was, so carefully crafted or whatever, gets its feedback right away, a PI or two. But if we don't do these things, right, I'll go through them fairly briefly, I can't deliver in that time frame. So what are these things? We talk about scalable DevOps from 2 dimensions. One is we have to scale back the lifecycle. If I want to deploy a 50th of a really big thing, I have to start that 50th of the really big thing at the front of the lifecycle. Right? I can't just do it all and then just divide up and only deploy a chunk. So this forces us to think differently about the flow of value through the system. And this is what we call the continuous delivery pipeline. And it is front and center. Every art now, that is the art rendering. That's what an art is. An art is granted full DevOps and release authority. And that also says I probably want to design my art differently. Right? And as we look forward a bit, we'll say, gosh, even the team design probably looks a little bit different when we do that. So let's poke these open. So this is what you'll see in SAFe, right front and center. So you won't be able to avoid continuous delivery. Exploration, integration, deployment, release on demand. And this is where most of the new IP comes from. I have to constantly be creating this stuff. That means that, every week, every PI, I've got to be bringing new stuff into the system. Features have a life cycle, but my value stream doesn't. The value stream is a continuous flow of things moving through to deployment. So we don't, as a team or a program, have an exploration phase. There's no such thing. We're always exploring. And we're doing, I think, a little better job of articulating some of what those collaborations look like, what the product manager and product owner collaboration is. But we have to do this all the time. I got to get my little 50th. I've grabbed a 50th out of the air, and I'm ready to do what with it? Let's just say it's one of 50 features, just to make the easy math. What am I going to do with that feature? I got to build it. Okay. So continuous integration is extended by this to the notion of I got to get that feature into the baseline. I got to get it, ready for staging, ready for deployment. So my 1/50th, that one feature, has to move very quickly through the process. But guess what? It's not code or story level CI. We have to have that too. It's system and solution level CI, because I want the 50th of a system now, not just a 50th of the code. Or 50 of the system coded and tested. It has to be fully integrated and ready to go in the process. So we scale DevOps lifecycle wise and kind of up the stack. And now I've got my feature. What's going to make it more convenient for me to deploy it? Lots of things. This stuff is all in the current version of SAFe, and you'll see it soon enough. I've got to make sure that, for example, I have a staging environment. This is a wake-up call for people that think DevOps is a quick solution to a hard problem. Okay, the staging environment has to look a lot like production. Oh, that's hard. Well, yeah, it is. But how else? You're going to push it into production without ever validated staging? Do you have a statistically significant data set? Do you have M. Campbell Pretty, one of our SPCs that in the interview for the DevOps Handbook, did an assessment at Telstra of her program, and she assessed the configurations in production and the configurations in development, and there was only a 50% match. So the development environment configurations didn't even look like production. So how is that going to deploy? It's going to be a nightmare. And many more, and there's more to this story. Now, we already have decoupled this. I hope we understand, develop on Cadence, release anytime. Cadence it's our best weapon against the inherent variability of R&D. It's the thing we know we can do. We're always going to plan. We're always going to do demo. We're going to always run inspect and adapt. We use Cadence to make routine things that can be routine. But releasing doesn't look like that. Releasing looks like whenever we need it. We released, for example, the implementation roadmap an article at a time, and we click from an existing one. So we're doing continuous releasing, but we didn't change the big picture until recently. And reality is, things aren't as simple as you think. A release is not a monolithic thing. If you look at the people, the web scale companies, the NetApps of the world and the Netflixes of the world that have achieved a fairly continuous release environment, they don't take the entire environment and re-release it. They create a set of new web services, add a couple features to that, and then release that piece. So when we think backwards now about art design and team design, we might ask our question is, we want faster time to market. What's the next question? Of what? We don't want faster time to market for big pictures that freaks people out. Faster time to market for articles, for sure. Faster time to market for other forms of IP. Faster times to market for courseware? Absolutely. They're different cycles. So not only is it not cadence-based, it's not even monolithic. Big systems don't release that way. And we call them value streamlets because we needed to call them something. Okay? They're the element of a value stream that can be released independently. And when I stand on that side, and I won't because it just blocks things, pretend like I'm standing over there, I'm looking back upstream and said, okay, if I want to reduce my time to market here, I have to go all the way back upstream through the solution and up to the top to say, okay, how would I design an art and a set of teams that could do that? Maybe that's just one team. Maybe that's two teams working together. Devops. Think of this as the non-functional requirements on the continuous delivery pipeline. Right? In order to make the continuous delivery pipeline work, we're going to need some things. We're going to need culture, automation, lean flow, measure everything, and recoverability. Now, the initial kind of DevOps mnemonic was CAMS, culture, automation, and measurement. But CAMS doesn't quite, it was CAM, culture, automation, measurement, and then it became S for sharing. But it doesn't quite capture everything for us, so we call this a calmer approach. So you have articulation of what that culture looks like. I'm a developer. I want my stuff to be released fast. Okay, are you prepared to stand up to knowing whether it's working in production or not? Are you going to answer the phone when it isn't? If not, this is not a DevOps culture. This is a culture that says, oh, you want other people to release your stuff fast, and then if there's some crappers in there, you want them to take care of that, right? That's not the culture at all. As a person doing deployment, okay, well, I've got this and it's not configured right for our current data set. Well, we should have talked about that before. You've got to be engaged in the process. You've got to be upstream. You've got to be NPI planning. We've got to basically marry that and talk about all of them. Lean flow. If you look at, for example, the new DevOps handbook, DevOps started out as largely deployment automation via toolchain. Okay. Well, if I want to deploy a small batch, where do I get the small batch? So it's kind of moved upstream. The thinking for the people in DevOps are going, wow, we really need to think about the value stream and think about lean flow. Well, that was always obvious to us. We have the flow part nailed. We just didn't have the tool chain automation married at the end of that. In order to do that, so we're sometimes shocked and appalled, amazed and impressed, thrilled and saddened by the fact that what we write down, people actually do exactly that way. Okay. It's kind of okay and kind of isn't. It just depends, right? But if our Kanban system takes you only to this point, which it does in 4.5, then there's no assumption about anything that happens downstream. So the program Kanban now, the default states are richer and deeper. And you can easily put a cumulative flow diagram on that and see work in process with simple tooling like just simple logic or even just entering a date stamp. We can figure out how long things were implementing on the average. We can figure out what the total time through the is, what our feature cycle time is, how much work in process we have, and how much is stacked up and where the bottlenecks are. All because we choose to visualize that work and discover that full work. We tried this exact Kanban. Well, it's got a nit or two in different labels for the development of the SAFE articles. And we watched that flow work and we said, yeah, is that really in staging yet? That means is it on the site yet, or is it still a Word document? Is it ready for release or not? So if we build it, you will come. And we're building a Kanban that says, done is there. That's done. All those other definitions of dones, those are WIMP definition of dones. Those are definitions of, well, it's more done than it was, okay? But we want it to be done. So increasing the span of that is material. And tooling that, instrumenting that. Now, I think in the Agile world, Measurement is an on-again, off-again thing. It's a love-hate relationship with measures. In a DevOps world, what do you think they think about measures? They measure freaking everything. They instrument, if you want to run DevOps and know your system's working, you have to know where it's working, and you can't wait for it to fail to find out. So in a complex system, the CSG case study, the people who work with Scott Prue, who is now the CIO there, the really big system, kind of a 12-platform system, they have 100,000 reporting points on that system. And then they have to build the scripts and the tools that are needed to be able to tell what's going, to be able to sort through that data. Because if you don't know, you don't know. It may or may not be working until you get the insight from the customers that you're done and it's not working. You've all seen the implement. How many of your SPCs? Raise your hand. Keep your hand up if you've at least reviewed the implementation roadmap. Yes. Okay. Why did it come so late, if you will? I think it's kind of late in the life cycle of SAFe. A lot of reasons. Just guess one. I don't care. You can be wrong. You never know. Good guess might get a cloth big picture.
Feedback from experience.
Pardon?
Needed feedback from experience.
Absolutely. The patterns weren't clear, right? Implementation after implementation after implementation, we started observing things, but they weren't all the same things. Was there for example, one of the decisions we made was a debate amongst ourselves. We don't want to create any extra organizations we don't already have or don't already need. Do we have to have a Lean Agile Center of Excellence? Well, guess what? We started looking backwards. It was never called that. So there was always 2 or 3 people dedicated to the mission, or there was an Agile working group. How many here are part of a thing like that? I'll bet a bunch of you are, right? That, if you look at organizational change management, that's critical. That's the locus of the energy that continues to drive the change. So when we did our assessments and we sat and talked to lots of people doing implementation, we said, that always exists. So we need it. How well does SAFe work if the leaders aren't trained in SAFe? Okay. Not very good. So is that an optional part of the roadmap? No, it really isn't. And frankly, we had a kind of a dismayed email the other day from one of our SPCT candidates, kind of the most deeply experienced, and she said, I left your class really excited, and I went to roll out Leading SAFe, and the executives won't go to the class. How am I going to implement SAFe? And I'm going, I won't say what I said, but I said, don't implement SAFe, implement FOO. Okay? Because you're not going to succeed down this path. If they don't care enough to learn how to do this, they've missed the point of a Lean Agile transformation. So I felt sorry for her, but I couldn't say, and here's the way you'll be successful if your leaders don't care to step up and lead. Now, you're leaders. That's why you're here. You're people that have a thirst for, continuous learning and improvement. Others like you, how many of you have 10 years experience with Agile? Okay? Think about the stakeholders that you're working with that aren't on board. How many years did they have experience with Agile? How much training have they had in Agile? How do we expect them to understand something that nobody's ever taken the time to teach? So we have a simple ask of you and of your enterprise. Adopt SAFe or not, but are you willing to invest, Mr. whomever, Director of the PMO, Director of Quality or whatever, will you invest 2 days of your time to learn about Lean Agile principles and practices, and in this case, in the context of SAFe? Can you afford not to know about this stuff? And then you decide. I'm not saying you're doing SAFe, we're doing SAFe. I'm saying, would you educate yourself first and then decide? And that always works. So the patterns became obvious. The other reason is I never studied organizational change management. Okay. So I had to do that. So I went back and read Cotter's book and Switch and started studying this stuff. It's like, oh my God, I recognize it now. What is this stuff called here? There's a few SPCs, maybe a small Lean Agile Center of Excellence, and 10 or 15 executives that get the new model. A sufficiently powerful coalition for change. Take any of those elements out, you may not have a sufficiently powerful coalition of change. What is this first art execution? Right? Great small victories.
early win.
Yep, create an early win, get feedback. Do that before you expand the portfolio, right? Get the credibility to that. What other steps are there? Ingrain the change in the culture. Winning is more fun, right? Sustain and improve. So this pattern emerged over the last couple years. It took us about 6 months to write it out. Had a couple choices, by the way. It might have been less work in theory if I'd have written all the articles and launched it at exactly one time, but I did incremental delivery. Do you think that meant I had to go back and rework some articles? Yeah. Absolutely did. I mean, most articles we go back and touch the others, but each week, for those of you who are doing implementing, or each week you had a new step. So the integral value of that incremental delivery far exceeds the big bang impact we'd ever had when we spent the 12 articles out. Plus, we got feedback. So we got feedback on all the articles. So we ate our own dog food here and did that by incremental delivery. There's some other stuff. Those of you who are SPCs, I won't jump all the way back. This is kind of an obvious one. We really need them. They're not on the big picture. Okay, we put them on the big picture. Because if people are going to read the big picture and say, this is what we need to do, well, we want them to have SPCs. So now they can't escape the notion, right? Why didn't I have them before? Because they're not part of the long-term operating model, unless they continue to coach or be an RTE, et cetera. But you're going to get started with something. So we built them on the big picture. Large solution, I already mentioned that. And we launched, guess what? Here was the problem with the old design. These stakeholders, whatever, go, well, that's really interesting. I've got a stake in that thing, but gosh, it just doesn't seem to be going very well, and I'm not sure what to do about it. Well, guess what? You are on the train. You're on the solution train. So it's exactly like the art at a fractal above the art and has the same behavior. Plan, do, check, act. Now it's an organization. Now it's not a bunch of icons. It's an organization. It's a physical, tangible thing. And we had to change some stuff. So, you remember the value stream engineer? What do you think it is now? Guess. Solution train engineer. And I know about 7 value stream engineers are going to be really mad at me about that. gone through the whole migration to set all that up. Scrum is Scrum. We use Scrum. We love Scrum. I'm on a Scrum team. We run a weird little combo of kind of a Scrum and Kanban. But we weren't structured in a way that made it comfortable for Scrum. Scrum has some really interesting definitions. Do you know that in Scrum, the Scrum Master and Product Owner is not part of the development team? Personally, I don't find that a convenient way to describe it. I liked the way we did it before. There's an agile team, but that's not what Scrum says. So if you come away from Scrum and you want to apply Scrum, those are the rules you were given. That team demo, really confusing. It's just a sprint review. Call it the sprint review, okay? And get over it. Because otherwise, what demo is that? The team demo is a system demo, a separate thing. Retro was always the retro. So just redefining these things in such a way that it makes it's more of a creature comfort. You know, that the Scrum kind of the Scrum cloak fits really well with those simple definitions. Cool, got it. How many of you here build systems that the cost of failure is either economically or socially way too high? Okay. You're almost by definition subject to compliance of one sort or another. Either internal, external, most of you external. I've worked in this field almost my entire career. We've never integrated what we know about compliance, real-time agile verification and validation and compliance into the framework. It's still not fully in there, but we built in the first connector. Okay, so we've created a white paper, we've created an article, the article will be published soon, a white paper soon, to talk about how this quality management system that most of you have, how many recognize those terms, quality management system? And how many is your quality management system based upon waterfall development? Same hands. How easy is that to change? It's really hard. Because if you blow that, somebody ends up in a little striped suit or something. So we have to start coaching enterprises as to how to a leaner thing. And a few tips. Build compliance incrementally too. Organize for value and compliance. Build quality and compliance in. Continuous verification and validation. People have been building medical systems with Agile since like 2004. Companies like Medtronic built pacemakers with it. Well, they don't stop at the end of the program and say, let's now verify and validate what we built. They do it continuously and throughout. So in a future release of SAFE, this might be its own configuration. We don't even know yet. We have quite a body of work that we have to figure out how to integrate, but we put our toe in the water to say we get compliance, because if we don't get compliance, what do your stakeholders say about SAFE or any model that you pick? That's not mature. Get that thing out of here. Where's my time box? It's like perfect.
Yeah.
All right.